Tired, drooping eyelids slid past Rarity's irises as a jolt brought her back to her senses. She gasped as the shock of almost falling asleep startled her awake. Her panicked eyes glanced around the room. A sewing machine was before her, its whirring motors humming and buzzing audibly in the quiet, dim room. The sun had long set behind the curtained windows, moonlight shining in from underneath the heavy hung-up cloth. A soft sigh escaped her lips. It was as hushed as she could manage. Blue irises shifted up towards the clock nailed to the wall above what appeared to be a shrouded corkboard. The cork was nowhere to be seen except for little patches of beige here and there. The rest was buried under pinned pieces of paper with scribbles and notes. Long-forgotten ideas for a rainy day. Some were crumpled, torn, and weathered, as if the ideas were written in a rush. But as Rarity continued to stare at the corkboard, she could feel the lump in her throat forming. This wasn't the same lump that formed when she tried to swallow her pride and continue to work, nor when she would hear the screeches from the masses who complained about her work, her art. No, this lump tasted of bitterness and hate. She took a shaky breath, trying to calm the flurry of thoughts that wanted to burst forth as she approached that board. A small thought crept into her mind as her horn lit up, illuminating the darkened workroom. So many wasted and unused ideas would remain on this board. She even noticed dust beginning to gather around the corners of the parchments, displaying their age. She eyed the date at the corner of one. 5 years. It had been 5 years since she had sketched that idea. 5 years of being forgotten and tossed aside. 5 years since she felt the creativity flow from her mind and translate itself into visions and images of colorful fabric, interweaved with the finest stitching, all from her own hooves. But now, well, that wasn't the case. Now, she created the pieces, and then she dealt with the complicated details. She would take care of Rarity's creations and make sure they were consumable for the masses. She would ensure that every pony in Equestria would only wear the latest and greatest from Rarity's signature couture. She would maintain the profits and the wealth.
Just create, Rarity. That's all you have to do. I'll take care of the rest, I promise.
Rarity swallowed down the regret as she recalled that conversation and how lighthearted and innocent it pretended to be. How everything seemed so much simpler then compared to now. It sounded like a brilliant plan. Rarity was getting older, and being an artist at heart, she wanted to focus just on the creation of it, the process of fashionable art, and she would handle all the formalities, the back end. She was younger, after all. Another sigh. The ticking of the clock seemed to echo in her ears as she turned away from the corkboard and looked vacantly at the closed door on the other side of the room. The fluorescent light from underneath reached the edge of Rarity's hooves as it bled across the carpet. She wondered just how long it had been since she last left that room. Usually, she brought her meals, so Rarity could focus. But considering the time and the pang growing in the pit of her stomach, Rarity decided to take a chance. She turned back to the sewing machine, though a piece of fabric hung loosely on it. The stitching, the seams, were neat and tidy, a quality of only a completed ensemble. She had completed the 4 outfits that were required of her that day. Surely she could just leave and quickly go downstairs and... Hoofsteps. They resonated from beyond the door. Rarity felt her chest clench when she heard them. The sweat began to bead on her brow as she raced back to the sewing machine, Rarity's horn glowed as fabric and needles lifted into the air and fitted themselves into the bare mannequin nearby. Cloth placed, pins inserted, and an outfit took shape. A simple red dress with white frills at the end that flared out. To her normal standards, it was too plain, too boring. But when did new and exciting fashion matter when every pony had to like it? That tight feeling resurfaced as she tried shutting her eyes to calm the nerves. When did things get this bad? When did this become their reality? This empty transactional state of being? When did The door swung open with a loud bang, flooding the room with light. Rarity didn't dare glance at the door as she continued to pin fabric into place. The older unicorn knew to keep her head down and to stay focused at the task at hoof. She could hear the hoof steps getting louder, then abruptly paused. It was too long of a pause for her liking, so she finally peeked over her shoulder.
Do you like it?
Rarity's wizened, raspier voice broke the silence. She could feel the tension in the room as it sent a shiver up her spine. When no response came, she shut her eyes again, praying for just a simple response. When it still didn't come, a sigh made her shoulders slump in defeat. Turning around completely, the light from the hallway shined in her eyes, blinding her. She winced as her eyes refocused, falling upon a white unicorn mare. She stood before her looking down, pale hairs of pink and purples, styled and primly in place, as taut skin and fur kept lines and wrinkles hidden away. It was then that Rarity realized why there had been silence. A little small glowing box. That damn accursed thing. Rarity pressed her lips in frustration as she glared at the distracting, wretched contraption in the pony's hooves.
Sweetie?
Rarity questioned, trying hard to blur the annoyance boiling in the back of her throat. The younger white unicorn held a single hoof up, as if to end the conversation that hadn't had the chance to start.
That looks like shit,
she muttered, never taking her eyes off of the small box.
I told you we need clothes that every pony will want.
Sweetie's tone was far detached from her own words. They sounded bored, vacant of feeling and warmth. Her focus was only on the device in her hoof. It continued to glow with the mare's green orbs glued. It flashed lights, casting deep shadows upon the younger mare's face. But it was in that moment that Rarity caught glimpse of the wrinkled corners of her sister's eyes. She wondered how much had really changed when she stared at her sister's true age finally shining back at her. Rarity waited again, hoping her sister would continue, but only the grating commotion of the small box filled the silence.
That is something every pony will like,
Rarity insisted.
How do you know that?
Finally, the mare looked up, pulled away from her trance.
Have you asked any pony?
The words stung sharp as Rarity felt that nagging lump again.
Well, no, because some pony has me on a very strict schedule.
Rarity spat back.
Maybe I could ask if some pony would let me.
Look, you asked for my help, and in order to make sure you're a part of Fashion Week, you have to get these outfits done now.
The glow dimmed on the device, causing the hallway light to cast harsh shadows across the room.
I did exactly what you asked!
Rarity screamed, pain and frustration rising to the surface, but the relief was short-lived. The tone in her voice, she knew that was too much. First came the wince, and then she stepped back. Her magic stopped, the pins, needles, and fabric falling to the floor behind her. She locked eyes with her sister, the fear beginning to set in. Fashion Week was the most important and crucial of affairs. Every pony knew that. But as Rarity shook her head, she felt the waves of anxiety crashing into her.
I'm sorry.
She blurted out, realizing her mistake.
Do you want your medicine?
It was a simple question, really. One would not assume how tainted those words really were as they left the younger mare's lips. The words were cold and sterile. White fur stood on end as the question lingered in the air between them. This was the cruel, devastating truth that continued to stare back at Rarity. She couldn't function outside of these walls, not without assistance. The only way she could continue her art was with her help. She'd known this for so long now, especially after the pain started. That unending, miserable ache that crept into her bones and would remain for days on end. How was she supposed to weave the visions in her mind if that crippling pain was there? Magic could only go so far.
And you're sure this will help?
Yeah, just one. Here, that's all I'll give you for now.
That relentless lump again. This was her prison. If she wanted her creations to become a reality, this had to be her fate. Maybe she should have listened to that old weathered orange mare back when this all started, when it was still just a simple problem and not a complex interlocking torture chamber of her creation.
We're getting too old for this, Rares. Let's let the youngins take over while we enjoy our golden years. I'm sure Sweetie can look over the books and the businesses.
Rarity bit into her cheek, recalling her naive response that day. She felt like a fool. Glistening blue oceans glared back at the younger unicorn, but quickly faded behind wrinkles that were veiled in the shadows.
Yes, I want my medicine.
Was all Rarity spoke as she turned around and resumed her work. Horn glowing, needles floated and continued to weave themselves in the fabric, while she tried to push down the rush of emotions whirling around in her mind.
Good.
Sweetie Belle replied. She could sense the shift in the room as she examined the other pieces that were pinned together on the mannequins. Each one a simple color with accents of white and black on the edges. She didn't understand why tastes were becoming more and more simpler amongst ponies today, but the stakes kept her from questioning it.
I brought you dinner.
She added curtly, levitating a covered tray and resting it on the table nearby, pushing and shoving fabric in the process.
Thank you.
Rarity mumbled, not turning to look at her sister.
You can take them all once I finish this piece.
The stale tone signaled to Sweetie the Rarity was done with the conversation.
Ugh.
Sweetie sighed, irritated, as she rolled her eyes. The stress of the situation grated on her nerves. She had agreed to this arrangement 5 years ago, and within that time, Rarity had become nothing but a recluse. Her sister got to stay in this room day in and day out, with food delivered and ponies coming and going as she pleased. Yet this is how she acted? This was the thanks and the gratitude Sweetie was given. If it wasn't for her, Rarity would have been out on the street, and the business would have... The small black mirrored box hummed to life in her hoof, brightening the room. Sweetie's attention turned back to it. More plans. More charity events. More press tours. More fashion shows. It was important that she attended and facilitated each one. Being the face of Rarity's fashion empire, she glanced up at her sister, who continued to work fabric into place on the still figure, a delicate operation of sorts that only one so skilled could do. The raw talent, some would say, but Sweetie Belle didn't care. All the talent in the world didn't matter if there was no financial stability behind it. The younger mare turned on her hooves and exited the room. The door clicked softly behind her, shutting and sealing her sister in the room. Another sigh. She wondered how much longer she would need to endure this. Shaking her head, she peered at the device one more time, her eyes falling on the title of an email. The late Rarity fashion line. She swallowed hard, wondering if she should get a lock for her sister's door.